Okay, Henry, it's lovely to hear your comments on that. Now, if we can move on, one of the things that I think we need to try and do as a group of people is try and promote links between the disabilities. You mentioned Disability Rights UK earlier. Where do you see those campaigning points where people can come together and be as one in developing the real fundamental rights with disabilities are so insistent on and require so much and are so purposefully trying to achieve?
That is a really interesting question, James, because I think it's really difficult. Because I think in the past, people have been doing a lot more themselves. And like I said before, I think it's been very much single disability issues. So that scope, RNIB, autism for action for autism, something like that. It has very much been single disability, and we still do that in school. We will treat the most important issue. So if somebody's got behavioural difficulties and a bit of dyslexia, the most important thing is to get behaviour under control and then the dyslexia. So I always say, well, a child may have ADHD one day and have dyslexia the next day. But we don't really work like that. And I think we should be much more fluid, really, to be able to do that. I think, actually, having talked to people on this, I think the law is already there. And I think we have to, Richard Reeser, who I think you've met through me, James, he runs Black History Month and seems to be involved in every disability organisation, country, I think. So Richard would say, what we need to do is test some of this law. But and the people are going to get very activated about, the problems with COVID and the problems of closing down the rights of disabled people, particularly people with mental health, changing the Care Act, which might have actually been illegal. And in fact, the government were warned this might be illegal when they did it, and they still did it. Because actually the Disability Discrimination Act and the Equality Duty still stands above this, even in COVID times. So an emergency measure has to be done very, very carefully. So yeah, the rights and law are a really huge area. I think what's interesting at the moment is that we were talking in one of our forums about the fact that you have a right to a positive conversation with your manager, and within a school or in public sector, they have to put together a disability access plan. Now, obviously, the access plan, let's start with that one, is always, so far, has been very much focused on physical access. So we're talking about ramps and clear markings and how the building looks, health and safety. But if we take a wider view on disability, what Richard is saying, well, the access plan should include involvement of children in the plan, participation, good conversation. It might involve a far wider scope of disability, not just physical disability, within the plan and within policy. So you're basically making those decisions for disabled people right at the beginning of new buildings or new initiatives. Like you want to move one department to the other. Well, if you have a fully interactive access plan, which is endemic, then disabled people will be involved at the beginning, not at the end of it. So, and then this whole positive conversation. So I've written something for the union, because I wasn't very happy with the union. They weren't really helping disabled people in this time of COVID. So we've looked at the positive conversation side, and that is really interesting. If we could bring together a lot more evidence of when managers haven't had positive conversations with disabled people, but also have good practice for when we do have good conversations and when people follow up, and it's a good feedback, and then also maybe even some videos, which is where you guys come in, is to make some role model videos of how you run an accessible access plan, or how you have good conversations with your managers. Maybe we should have some role play videos, which we're thinking about doing with the Pocket of Trust, to show employers how they can talk to their disabled employers, the employer can talk to the employer in a much more positive way and have proper, feedback. So I wrote something for where the barriers are in this. I wrote something where what conversations you might have with your employer, and then also how positive we could be in praising people and making them feel valued. So my big word on this is not valued, I can't remember, is sort of feel activated within the workforce, that we feel that we are contributing, not just being contributed to, but we're contributing, which I think is really important.
Yeah, no, and I feel the same. I have not helped myself in the world of employment. I mentioned my interictal psychosis. Certainly the clear thinking has at times not been there, and the ability, for example, at the end to demand 5 minutes for people to wrap up and agree action points and reiterate them to me would have been incredibly helpful in certain job situations in the past. I myself have recently tried to join Unison without success, but I'm a member of the GMB and hope that they might be able to help me going forward with my employment rights. And I won't lose sight of my own power as an individual to develop my thinking on the whole area of employment. How are we on our time away from work? How can we improve the way that disability is developed, thought through, and applied so that those with disabilities are in a good place, undertaking leisure activities and the like?
Well, I think there are some accessible websites now. There's like Disabled Go, isn't there? Been around for a long time, which is sponsored by Marks and Spencer's. And then there's a new one. I think actually Disability Rights UK have got a link with somebody in East London doing a similar thing for workspaces. So they're trying to find good accessible workspaces, shared workspaces for disabled people. So I think there again that it's finding out where these things are happening, and then on the customer relation, going back to what we were doing in April with the RNIB. At first, the blind people on the group felt quite happy to work from home, and but then suddenly we realised we weren't seeing our friends, we weren't getting out. Life really was more isolating. So I think having friendship groups for people with disabilities, is really, really important. And now we're seeing that a lot more in the disability sector. I think that there are lots more. Croydon Vision, I did a talk for the beginning, for Croydon Vision, and that part of London Vision it's not quite as dynamic. There are some great people there, but it's more about people losing sight at a slightly older age. So obviously that social side is really important to keep those people connected.
So Henry, another question for you. How have the rights of those with disability changed over the last few years? Are things improving? What developments have there been? What's your take on that?
I think the attitudes or rights. I think the rights are there, but they've been hidden. And I think the government should be held to account, because the government are following their own agenda. They're not keeping to the international standard on disability, which apparently, according to somebody I was talking to, she's the head of equality duty for the Commonwealth. And she was saying that internationally, disability is the only part of the inequality duty that should be positively discriminated.
Yeah, so Henry, another question for you. We've got an international audience here on Disability People's Channel, and we need to always be mindful of the development of our international links, that we only gain strength by thinking on a global basis. In epilepsy, there's a sort of a feeling of perhaps there's unkind spirits and evil doings going on to create the epilepsy, which is not a helpful way of thinking. Do you face similar issues, or do you see similar issues on the international scene in places like Africa?
Well, I suppose I live in London, so I hear, what you're saying. I don't have first-hand experience, but yeah, I think well, the truth is, for supporting children, I think it's still only that um, something like 3% of children worldwide are supported at school. So, from a young age, if you're not instilling that support for disabled people, you know, are you building up a culture which accepts disabled people? And the answer probably is no, you're not. Um, and a lot of charities now are, trying to focus on care, medical care. So maybe for medical conditions there might be more understanding, but no, I actually did go to an international conference on disability at London School of Hygiene, actually. So what is very interesting is, so they have a particular example of that. So they were sending, in Pakistan, they were sending young girls to a school for the deaf. And in that culture, it was the wrong thing to do because these children were being abused because girls don't live on their own. So it just showed, and somebody said, well, that's what we're dealing with. There isn't a one fit. There's not a simple solution. You have to look at the culture to be able to explain the disability and also help the people there.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm aware that the International League Against Epilepsy, which has a British chapter, does also look into areas like this and try and promote a more balanced view based on the science and the medical diagnosis for seizures in Africa. Henry, we're both the other side of 50 and have been good friends for a number of years now. What do you see in terms of our whole lifetime experience? How has things changed? I've been somebody who's had epilepsy for 28 years now, and on the epilepsy front, we have seen a reduction in stigma, but it's still there and still needs to be campaigned on, particularly at the National Epilepsy Week next May in 2021. What's your take on how things have changed over the last, say, 30, 40 years plus?
So I think, having gone to a special school myself, I think this whole area of understanding disability personally has changed. I think, having gone to special school, I never had a problem having to think about having bad eyesight myself, because I was in a school with people with bad eyesight and it was part of my identity. But working with children who are autistic, I think this whole idea of disclosure and understanding of how am I disabled is a huge new question, actually. So you've got a whole class of 27, mainstream children, you've got an autistic child. And then at some point that child wants to question their disability and wants to find out about it. And, if you're in a special school, it's around you and you can compare your disability. We had people at school who had thalidomide and physical disabilities. So we felt quite empowered in a way, even though we were partially sighted. If I was the only partially sighted person in a class, would I feel so empowered? Would I be able to compare notes? So but then on the other side, these children growing up in the community with being disabled also have are they going to make friends? Are they going to be isolated? So it's much wider. Are young people more accepting disability? Yes, I think they are. I think with the whole gender issues going on at the moment, children are becoming more aware of difference. I'm not ranking disability alongside that, but I think young people can be more fluid about understanding things. What we're doing in school now is trying to bring disability through in a number of different discussions. So I work in a school with an inclusive base for autistic children, but we've only just started putting a program together for emotional intelligence, to actually, for people to understand their disabilities, but also for the whole class to understand disability, which is, that's taken a long time, if you think about it. We've just assumed that people would know about their own disability and and understand the person sitting next to them. So that's and I think the transition now, so that the law has changed in this country, particularly. So disabled people had support at school, but they didn't have very good support after school. So that's the biggest change for me. When I was at university, I had no support at all, which has probably affected the whole of my life, really, for job prospects. But now you get support from, if you have a care plan, you get support all the way to your 23 or 25. But then I think also we're always playing catch up, because just as we get to the point where, we were good with computers, we start having to use laptops, and people start working in coffee shops. So I think, as disabled people, the reality is that the workplace is always uphill. My rather famous head teacher at school, who was sort of involved in education, said, as a disabled person, you have to do 110% to get to the same place. And I think, I'm afraid that's probably still true.
That's very interesting, Henry. I mean, just to sort of wrap things up a little bit, that I wholeheartedly agree that more needs to change. It's instructive that the disability minister, for example, isn't a member of the cabinet or the shadow cabinet, but should be there fighting the good fight on behalf of those with disabilities at the highest level, whether it's in a political party or a UK government or internationally as well. There's more to be done. And it's through activities that people like you and I play our small part that when it is joined by others, it can promote change. And those influencing the influencers really should take heart by some progress, but it's not enough. We need to do more. And let's all try and do it by singing on the same hymn sheet and developing our own thinking on our own words and deeds for the good of those with disability. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Henry, and I'll see you again soon as a good friend.